Our speaker today is Pete Soderman, a published author and lecturer with a background in computer engineering. He's been helping others to recover from addictions for 20 years. We are not powerless over our addictions or our other habits, he says. We can learn to make the necessary changes to our thoughts and beliefs that will relieve us of any self-defeating behaviors that are keeping us from achieving our goals. Pete's presentation is from Powerless No Longer, his book, and he'll explain how the book came to be and where it will go from here. Powerless No Longer is available on Amazon and locally at Diane Pearl's. There will be an opportunity to purchase a signed copy after Open Circle at the Peacock Garden Restaurant on Cologne. Let's welcome Pete Soderman.
Hi. Thank you very much. Morning. I'd like to welcome you all here. My name is Pete Soderman. I'm here this morning to talk about a book I published on Amazon and other places in September called Powerless No Longer, Reprogramming Your Addictive Behavior. Since I published it, I've been gratified by the response. I've gotten some good solid reviews, many from professionals in the addiction field. I was approached by a leading company in the audiobook field and have released the audio rights, so it will be coming out as an audiobook shortly after the first of the year. This is my fifth talk here at Open Circle. Almost 2 years ago, I spoke on neuroplasticity, or how our experiences and our daily lives can change our brain's functional organization and physical structure, and how we learn, and specifically how we learn addiction. And I spoke on REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. That's a therapy in the school of thought whose basic premise is that it is our interpretation of events rather than the events themselves that upset us. I spoke on Smart Recovery, which is an evidence-based addiction recovery support group with 400 meetings worldwide, including one here in Ajijic. And I spoke earlier this year over the summertime on critical thinking skills, which are an important part of any cognitive recovery program and fairly useful in our daily lives. Each of those talks ran 40 minutes or so. They were standard Open Circle talks, and they're all covered in depth in the book. I'm not going to cover those subjects again. If you'd like more information on those subjects that I just mentioned, you have three choices. You can buy a signed copy of the book at Peacock Garden after the talk. You can buy it at Diane Pearl's, or you can borrow the book from the LCS library. There's a couple of copies there. What I'm going to talk about this morning is how the book came to be, what the design considerations were, what it contains, and I'm going to do a few selected readings from the book. First of all, how it came to be. A good friend of mine, Michael Warner, one of the co-founders of Smart Recovery, showed me a diagram one afternoon from a book that he was currently reading. It was a diagram called The Craving Response for Alcohol, and it was from written in a book called The Craving Brain by Ronald Rudin. And the diagram showed the detail of the craving response for alcohol, starting with a stimulus. In this case, it was ice tinkling in a glass, and it went down through a lot of convoluted things that made up the craving response and influenced it. The bottom line of it was, at the very bottom, the addict had two choices. He could take a branch that led to Alcoholics Anonymous, where they receive a conditioned rise in serotonin and be able to abstain, or the other direction was, of course, leading to a drink. But near the top of the diagram, on the same level as the stimulus, was an arrow with a note attached to it, and it said, Buddhism acts here. The implication was that Buddhism short-circuited the craving response because it relieved the practitioner of their conditioned mental attitudes and belief systems. I remember saying to Mike, wow, smart recovery works in exactly the same way. Somebody should write a book explaining why. Mike said, why don't you? And that was the beginning of Powerless No Longer. That's how it came to be. It just started from a simple diagram. Who's the book for? Well, when I started writing it, I had in mind anyone who's questioning their own substance use. Also, anyone who wanted to change any self-defeating behaviors that they might have. And people who were turned off by 12-step programs, and there's many, many of those. Or people that had tried 12-step and failed. I wanted a book that was short and to the point. I didn't want to write a tome. I didn't want to write something for professionals. I'm not one myself. I wanted it to be readable in no more than 3 sittings. I wanted it to contain a good explanation of addiction, at least so far as we knew it. A good explanation of how people actually recover, a review of current recovery methods, and some suggestions so people could take what's available and build a program for their own needs. When I first started out, I was just going to write a book that showed how smart recovery worked and why. As I began the research, I realized very quickly that that's not a way to convince anyone of anything, nor is it the way science is done. As many of you know, the way you do science is you start with a hypothesis, and then you design an experiment, or you do some research that are designed to falsify that hypothesis, because that's what you want to do. You want to falsify the hypothesis, then you want to modify it, get it a little closer to the truth, or throw it out completely and find another hypothesis. Well, I needed a hypothesis to start with to falsify, so I chose one that is pervasive in the treatment industry, and also one that I learned very well in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1990. And that is the hypothesis that an addict is powerful over his disease and cannot recover without help. Now, that's a hypothesis that makes a true statement about the real world. Well, is it true or not? And that's where I started. And some people would say that the help that's necessary must be supernatural. That's not everybody says that, but some do. That's part of it too. I started looking at actual studies, and this took me nearly a year. I looked at hundreds of studies from the 1950s to the 2000s across all substances, from heroin to nicotine, cocaine, and alcohol. And what I found, and I chose a representative 10 or 12 or so to include in the book, was that the majority of addicts, 60 to 90%, depending on the substance, the severity, and certain other factors, recover either on their own or with minimal help. The average is close to 75%. That's what the data say. Far from being powerless, the rule rather than the exception is that addicts recover on their own or with minimal help. Second thing I found was there were 4 things that were common to most of these natural recoveries, because that's what the industry calls them. The 4 things that the addict had to do or learn to do in order to recover from their addictions. First was they had to, and this is the most important, they had to reach the point where the consequences of the behavior outweighed any benefit gained by the behavior. Consequences of the behavior had to outweigh any benefit. Professionals call this point the crystallization of discontent. Unless an addict reaches, when an addict reaches this point, that he realizes that it's not worth it, almost anything will work. Without reaching that point, almost nothing will work. The second thing the addict needed to do was learn to control their urges and cravings. They had to survive the early part of recovery when the cravings and urges are strongest. Third thing was they had to learn some method of ongoing problem solving. We all live in the real world. We all face the same stresses. We all face the same types of problems. We think we're unique, but we're not really. We all face the same things. Addicts are used to medicating themselves to remove the bad parts of reality and kind of stick with the good parts. So the addict had to learn to live in the real world. And the fourth thing was they had to change their focus from short-term gratification to the achievement of long-term goals. As an addict in the third stage of addiction is thinking only of his next drink, his next fix, his next high, his next whatever, and very seldom thinking beyond that. Well, the process of learning, the achievement of long-term goals and working toward them is also known as growing up. Many addicts never do that. They stay in a more or less child state. The other thing that was apparent from the studies that I did, research that I did, was that no single program, no single set of modalities worked in all cases for all people. There are no silver bullets with addiction. Okay? Most successful recoveries, I found that people take a little from here, a little from there, whatever resonates with them, and puts it together and makes kind of their own program out of it. And that's how most of the successful recoveries took place. The second bit of research I had to do, and this took almost another year, was into how addiction works. I wanted to know a little bit about why I behaved as I did when I drank. Why do addicts fail to see their problems when they're so clear to everyone around them? I spent a year delving into various books on neurophysiology and addiction and going through studies and whatnot. Of course, part of that time was in teaching myself how to make sense of these darn things, because I'm a layman. I have an engineering background. I'm just an ordinary guy who was willing to do a great deal of work in an area that I have a vested interest in. I wanted to know for me, okay, not only for what I was writing. The bottom line, after nearly a year of study, we don't really know what causes addiction. Have an awful lot of really good ideas, but there's no hard and firm, this is the path. Okay, it varies with different people. It's a very complex biopsychosocial problem with many different causes. 50% of it, there's a 50% genetic component. We know that from twin studies. But we also know from twin studies that the genetics aren't destiny. Why does one twin and another twin brought up in the same environment or in different environments, why is it always 50%? We don't have an answer to that. Addicts develop acute self-defeating belief systems. Is that a precursor of addiction, or is that caused by the addiction? The answer to that is yes. It happens either way. It can be a precursor or it can be caused by. There are chemical and learning components of addiction. Addictive substances and some addictive behaviors cause chemical changes in the brain. Some of these are irreversible. And we can't do anything about them. At least at the present time we can't. There's a huge learning component of addiction. And of course, that's the side of addiction that we can address and that cognitive programs address. There are 3 phases of addiction. It starts with positive reinforcement. Addiction, like any other self-defeating behavior, it had to work at one time. If it didn't work, we wouldn't have started doing it. So at one time, we received the benefit from the drug or behavior. The second stage is called regulated relapse. Here, the addict binges at times, but is still making appropriate choices of when it's okay to drink and when it's not. The regulated relapse phase is marked by tolerance. Okay? It takes more of the drug to get what the addict, or more of the behavior to get what the addict is looking for, because the brain reacts to an overabundance of the drug. The third phase is called compulsive relapse. From a learning standpoint, it corresponds to habit memory. Those things we do without conscious awareness, okay? So throwing our car keys, hopefully in the same place when we come home. Any skill we learn or anything else, these are habit memories. And so is addiction. In the third stage, it becomes a habit, okay? And very little of our conscious thought is involved. It's driven by the reward system, the limbic system, and that's why it's very, very powerfully encoded. The third stage is marked by negative feedback. Rather than getting a positive result from the drug or behavior, the addict gets a negative result from not using the drug or behavior. Okay, it's either emotional pain, physical pain, or something. So the stages go from positive reinforcement, drug makes you feel better, to negative feedback, where if you don't use the drug, you feel awful. You never get back to the positive reinforcement stage. Of course, the only part of the addiction we can address is learned behavior, and that's what Powerless No Longer is about. It's about replacing those learned behaviors with healthy behaviors. And what I just went through was the first 3 chapters in Powerless No Longer. And the next thing I had to decide was how I was going to structure the book. I decided to use what is known as the stages of change, or the trans-theoretical model of change, as a structure for the book, because it kind of acts as a roadmap. Gives people an idea of where exactly they are. The stages are simply pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, relapse, and termination. Relapse, of course, is an optional stage in recovery, but the data show that 57% of addicts who recover on their own do relapse at least once. So that makes relapse a normal part of recovery, if not even though it's an optional stage. I say the book is structured that way, and I have chapters and sections devoted to the various things. The next thing I wanted to talk about in the book is, all right, you've got a problem, it's an addictive problem, what works? Okay, what do the studies show works for addiction? It turns out there's a book that's published and updated nearly every year called the Handbook of Alcoholism Treatment Approaches, Effective Alternatives. It's by a group of psychiatrists in New Mexico led by Dr. William Miller. And what they do is they tabulate every study that comes out on addiction and alcoholism, and they rate the studies, they look at the modalities, they look at how the studies were done, how effective they were, whether they were good science or not, so on and so forth. And they come out with a list that's updated constantly of the modalities that work. The top modality in relieving addiction is a brief intervention with a trusted medical person, just a chat with a family doctor. That is what does it for, or that's what's most effective for doing it for addicts. Followed by motivational enhancement, community reinforcement, self-change manuals, like Powerless. Powerless is a self-change manual. Behavioral self-control training, behavior contracting, social skills training, marital therapy, behavioral, case management, and cognitive therapy. And those are what works. 7 of the modalities deal with motivation, 5 with urges, 8 with problem solving, and 3 give some insight into balancing short and long-term goals. Those are the points I mentioned before, and they're tied back to the studies that show what works. So we know that these things work. I mentioned earlier that REBT, is rational motor behavior therapy, is used to change our belief systems. Well, how do we tell if our beliefs are irrational in the first place? Okay, REBT works in ABC system. A is the activating event, whatever it is. B is the belief about the event. C are the emotional consequences of the belief about the event that we want to challenge if it's irrational. So how do we decide if it's irrational? There are three questions we can use to challenge our beliefs. And the first is my belief based upon fact? And this works for any self-defeating behavior. Is my belief based upon fact? Have you ever really looked at these beliefs that cause certain emotions in you to see if they're based upon fact? We seldom do that. Second is, does my belief help me achieve my short and long-term goals? Okay? We have goals that we've established. They're out there. And if something happens and it causes us to have a belief that goes contrary to those goals, it's a self-defeating, irrational belief, and we need to challenge that. The third is, does my belief help me feel the way I want to feel? If you're feeling an emotion you don't want to feel, the belief that's causing the feeling doesn't pass the third rational question. So if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling anxious, look at the belief that's causing that and apply these 3 questions to it and see indeed if it's rational or not. As time goes by, more and more studies are indicating that mindfulness is an important part of recovery. Even in 12-step, mindfulness plays a role. In the cognitive therapies, mindfulness is an important component. You're not going to change your belief systems if you're not there to notice what the belief system is in the first place. Mindfulness is nothing other than being there, present to our lives and in the moment. What does it mean to be in the moment? It means nothing more than chopping wood when you're chopping wood, washing dishes when you're washing dishes, and talking to a friend when you're talking to a friend. It means that when you're doing those things, you're doing those things, and you're not mentally somewhere else. Recovery is about trying to rid ourselves of self-defeating beliefs. Not only recovery, but a good portion of not only recovery, but most people could benefit by looking at their self-defeating beliefs. I mentioned in one of my prior talks, I went into some of them, I should always feel happy, confident, and in control of my emotions. I should never feel anxious, inadequate, jealous, or vulnerable. Oftentimes we beat ourselves for not feeling good. Now, I should feel better than that. I can't think of anything that's more rational. Whatever our feelings are, they are indeed valid and a result of our current belief system. It's the belief system we have to look at. Being upset for being upset makes no logical sense and keeps us from looking at the underlying belief that caused the upset in the first place. I'm a little hesitating because I'm skipping around. I started a little later than I thought I was going to, so I'm leaving some things out. But I spend a great deal of time in the book on self-defeating beliefs for obvious reasons. I'm going to leave evidence behind. I base the entire book, except for the last chapter, on things that there is a great deal of evidence for. In the last chapter, I kind of, it's called Thoughts on Recovery, and it's kind of a personal philosophy, the things that work for me. Not only in recovery from my own addiction, but also to lower stress after a major heart attack I had in 1999. I can't do stress. I just can't. Right? And I'll do anything to relieve stress so that I don't have to feel it. And by doing that, I've developed a few principles that help me do that, and I share them in the book. Okay. By the way, the people who are just visiting here, one of the biggest things I ever did to reduce stress in my life was move here 2.5 years ago. Okay. Because the only stress you feel here is whatever you put on yourself. That's just the way it is. The 3 principles that I kind of developed are: first, give yourself permission. The second, live in the moment as much as we can. And the third, it sounds awful zen, but it is, and I can't help it. End your own suffering. Okay? We cause our own suffering. So we have the power to end it, and yet we often don't. A good place to begin is by giving ourselves permission to be good to ourselves. Okay? You wouldn't think you'd have to do this, but we do. Okay? Oftentimes we don't feel like we should be good to ourselves for one reason or other. So simply start by giving yourself permission to be good to yourself. Permission to be happy. We can choose to be happy even if the world is falling down around us. Okay? Happiness is a choice. We can give ourselves permission to do the things we've always wanted to do. Okay, we're down here, most of us are retired. Give yourself permission to do what you want to do. Okay? I gave myself permission to sit down for 4 years and write a book. And now I'm giving myself permission to sit down and build a wooden model. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but whatever comes up, I'm going to give myself permission to do it. As long as it's legal, it doesn't hurt anybody, you know. Live in the moment. Yes, you have cares, worries, fears, and other things that pull you from the moment, but they all concern things that may happen, don't they? They aren't right here, right now, are they? As we pass through life, we deal with it one moment at a time, whether we focus on it or not. That's just the way time works. We have no choice in the matter. We are either there or we are not. Life happens anyway, whether we pay attention or not. This moment right now is all you have. It will never come again. If you let something take you out of it, you've squandered it. Peace and serenity here in this moment. I keep telling people, in this moment, right now, you're equal to your life. You're equal to everything that's going on right here in this moment. You get out of it, and that's when we start getting, when upsets start coming in. And the last thing that I want to talk about is, or the last principle really is, Royce Beckhart, the president of the American Humanist Association, came and spoke to my group in Wilmington one time, and he ended with what became his personal philosophy. And I kind of adopted it, or tried to. You know, we're all human beings here. Try to live your life so as to increase the sum total of joy in the world while decreasing the sum total of misery. I thought that was kind of neat. So I kind of adopted that as my own. When we look at the world as children, we do it with a sense of awe and admiration. Somehow, without anyone telling us, we sense that there is a connection between living things. We do not know yet that we share varying amounts of DNA with every single plant, animal, and human being on Earth. We just know that we feel comfortable here and we belong. Over the years, we lose this sense of connection. As addicts, we do not feel comfortable in our own skins, let alone as inhabitants on Earth. When we start realizing again that we are connected, that every atom and everything we see was forged in the belly of a star, we begin to see ourselves as part of a larger whole. We also see that when we treat others badly, we know it. And we pay the price in an increased level of stress. If we treat others well, we are treating ourselves well and decreasing the sum total of misery in the world. Thank you. Is there any questions? Again, I'll be at the Peacock Garden Restaurant about 11:45, and there'll be copies there available if anybody's interested.
Thank you. We'll take some questions. I'm sure there are plenty.
How's that? Is that good enough? I enjoyed your talk very much. You spent a good deal of your time. You looked at it from an engineer's point of view, too, analytical. This question may be off-field for you, but why does it seem today, around the world, specifically the United States, because we seem to have more addictions now than ever, why does it seem like there's just more people getting hooked on? And by the way, I think one of the worst things out here is that methamphetamine, nobody's, that is the devil's own. But would you mind letting us know your sentiments on that? Why we need more drugs?
This is just a speculation, and it's my personal opinion, okay? And I don't want to get too political, but One of the things that drives addiction is self-defeating behaviors. We have in the United States a government that seems bent on self-defeating behavior, and a society that seems bent on self-defeating behaviors. In order to overcome things like that, one thing, well, Dan, when I got out of high school in '63, and when I got back from Nam, the world was wide open. There were opportunities everywhere. Okay, there was nothing stopping you if you were just willing to work. And, you know, that's not the case today. It's not even close. I can understand discouragement. I can understand depression. I can understand all those things. And those are the things that drive drug behavior. You know, when we were kids, there was a very small percentage of people, the beatniks or whatever you want to call them, drop out, and you know, there's no hope for this society, blah blah blah. I can see that happening to a great extent up there and in a lot of the rest of the world. And it's too bad that that's the kind of thing that drives addictions, as well as many other self-defeating behaviors.
Just one comment about the mention of methamphetamines. With one single experiment with methamphetamines, it's been shown that some people are totally addicted from that point on. So it's a choice that we learn somehow while we're experimenting as part of it.
Thank you very much for your talk. I met a man once who said he'd been addicted to crack cocaine, and he also had been addicted to gambling. And he said that the gambling addiction was much harder to kick than the crack cocaine addiction. Do you have any theories as to why that would be?
So much depends upon the individual and what they get out of the behavior or the substance. In my own case, quitting alcohol was a walk in the park compared to quitting cigarettes. Cigarettes, however, I quit cold turkey after one talk with a trusted medical person. Okay, of course it was after a major heart attack. I like to say I quit by heart attack. I spent my first week in intensive care, and they frown on your smoking in intensive or oxygen around. So I missed the first weeks of craving, but still, kicking cigarettes was a big deal to me, much bigger deal than quitting alcohol, even though alcohol certainly controlled my life a whole lot more and impacted my life a lot more. So it's very dependent on the individual and how the particular addiction has affected them.
Any more questions or comments?
There's statistics all over the place, but they mean very little when you look at an individual.
Okay, I'm coming.
Please stand. Again, thank you. You mentioned this moment is equal to your life. Could you elaborate, elucidate a bit more on that one?
Most of our emotional upsets are due to worries about things that are going to happen, concern about things that have happened, most of which we have no control over, or very little. And yet we let these things take us out of this moment where, almost no matter what's going on, if you're in the middle of a robbery or something, it's a different thing. But most of the time, and most of the moments we're in, if we take the time to be in them, we're equal to them. Whatever happens in this moment, okay, most likely is not going to bring the kind of anxieties, fears, regrets that we normally wallow in, and that we let upset these moments. Okay? Is that a little clearer?
You mentioned briefly about being connected. I believe there is a serious problem with the high-tech world, with people feeling they are connected because they are texting people. But for me, when I look up at the moon, and I know that that moon is the same moon that all my loved ones are looking at, then I feel connected. Do you believe that there is an issue with people going into believing that everything is better with high tech, and there's, for want of a better word, a loss of soul, a loss of an individual, that there is not another person on the earth like us?
This again is personal opinion. The more we're connected electronically, in my opinion, the less we're connected as people. Okay? When I'm talking to someone face to face, I'll make an exception for Skype, Skype video. When I'm talking to someone face to face, and I'm really there, seeing their reactions, watching the change in their facial expression, hearing their words, and so on and so forth, and really communicating. Okay, that's a hell of a lot different than this. I don't do this myself. I never have, but that's just me. I agree with you. The more we're connected electronically, generally speaking, the less we're connected as people. We don't see ourselves as people. We see ourselves as the person who's typing on the other end of Facebook someplace. That's not connection to me. I agree. Anything else?
One more.
In your research, what have you found in the sense of support groups? You mentioned that an individual person can work this out, but what percentage of, you're talking about personal contact and stuff like that, where you're accountable to a support group?
Again, this is so highly dependent upon the individual. I cover that particular subject very deeply in the book, by the way. Myself, I spoke about people pulling a piece from here and pulling a piece from there. Okay. When I first realized that I had a problem with alcohol, I stumbled into Alcoholics Anonymous. It was 1990. There were no secular programs. It was basically nothing else. So I stumbled in there, and over the course of the next few years, I used the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, I didn't do any of the other stuff, but I used the fellowship. Okay, it was nice to have a bunch of guys to go to coffee with after meetings or on Saturday mornings and talk about stuff, life stuff, this, that, and the other. In a very real sense, those people I met there socialized me. I was an obnoxious son of a gun. They say that addicts are people with monstrous egos and low self-esteem, and that's absolutely correct. Okay, I had to be socialized. I had to be around people who wouldn't put up with my bullshit. Who wouldn't put up with me putting them down because I wanted everyone else down at my level. Okay, I went through life thinking that I had the power to raise or lower people's self-esteem. We don't have that power. Only we have the power over our self-esteem. Some of us don't know it, but that's the truth. Self-esteem is not a variable. We try to rate ourselves oftentimes on individual, I'm getting way off track here, I'm sorry. We try to rate ourselves on one individual trait that we have or other. And that's just a recipe for low self-esteem and disaster. I didn't mean to get that far off. Anything else?
Another one here, please, sir.
Thank you very much for your talk there today. I'd just like to mention that there's so many different addictions, from love, romance, sex, food, gambling, alcohol, and drugs. And what I'd like to know is, have you encompassed the spiritual program and adopting a higher power, or you differ from that? Thank you.
Again, different strokes for different folks. I have no belief in the supernatural. Never have. Okay. So that kind of answers that question. There is no evidence that spirituality is necessary for recovery. Zero. And there have been a lot of studies done. On the other hand, there are many people, and I would say most, have some aspect of what you might call spirituality in their program. I do, I just don't call it that. That connectedness I talked about to other people, to the rest of the world, so on and so forth. I talk about it as a stress reducer, but it's also my idea of spirituality. Okay. You don't need a higher power. You don't need in my opinion, you don't need a higher power. You don't need something outside yourself to get that feeling of awe and admiration about the universe, our connectedness, and with other people and the rest of the world. In my opinion, you don't need that. But some people make that a part of the program, and that's great. At Smart Recovery, for instance, we do not discourage that. Okay? It's not a quote-unquote spiritual program. We don't talk about it, etc., but we don't discourage it. We don't have a problem with someone using Smart Recovery, for instance, and I have no problem with someone using those principles as a secondary, tertiary, or whatever, because I know quite well that from personal experience and the experience of hundreds of others that I've known, that people pull things from here, there, and everywhere, little parts and pieces, and that's great. You know? We're all individuals.
I think that's our concluding question. Thank you very much. You really...
Thank you very much.
As you know, our speaker next week is Manuel Aguilar, who will speak to us and show us, give a slide lecture on Frida Kahlo. His lecture is called Frida Kahlo, the Brush of Anguish. It's a 2-hour talk at the Hotel Real de Chapala. And Jim described how you can come early here. I think we said between 9 and 9:30 and pick up a ride if you need that. So Frida Kahlo is considered by many to be one of the top women artists in North America of the previous centuries. So we've seen her face on chairs and boxes and fans and everything you can imagine. So we hope you'll join us next week. You can turn on your cell phones now and please stack your chairs. Thank you.
Boy.